everybody, and welcome to this week's core message. We are now on week 7 already of our series called Stories and Songs. And during this series, we have been going through the book of Psalms, and we've been picking out a few key psalms that are related to David or written by David. And we've been asking how they help shape our character, how we can use these stories, these songs, these poems, these moments in David's life to help us hone our character more into the likeness of Jesus. So that's our aim for this week too. As I said, we're in week 7 and it finds us in Psalm 139. Now, if you've been around anything Jesus for longer than 5 minutes, you've probably heard Psalm 139 before. You have maybe seen verses of it in prints, in artwork, in kind of Christian media, and you've probably heard a sermon or two about it too. And it's because it's a brilliant psalm and a very good tool for our character development. And I think it lends itself really well to many different uses. It's kind of just vague enough for us to use in a multitude of different ways. And if you are one of those people that has heard Psalm 139 just one too many times, that even just me saying it makes you kind of roll your eyes and go, oh, just not another one, just no, stay with it, okay? Can I just encourage you to come with me? It'll be fine. I hope that this will be helpful to you. If it's not, you can shout at me about it later, that's fine. But I hope that maybe having another look at this will show us something that is going to be helpful to us in our character development. And if you are completely new to this, you've got no idea why I just said what I did, and you've never even heard of this psalm before, then welcome to Psalm 139. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that this time that we have together is going to help you use it in your character development and in your walk with Jesus, so that you can become more like him as we read through this. So before we read it, I just want to introduce to you an idea. And the idea is that as we develop our character, as God shapes us into his likeness, that it's almost like a circle, that we go through this kind of circle-shaped process almost, like a cycle, and that it consists of different parts, different kind of compartments to that process, that we go through these different stages, all of which are good, all of which are helpful, and all of which are designed to help us hone our character and to become more like him. Now, the original idea of kind of the circle shapes come from a guy called Mike Breen. If you want to hear why that's inspired me, or what that's got to do with anything, then you can chat about that to me later. It's not his exact thing, but it's loosely inspired by what he said. So what I'm going to introduce to you is not the exact same thing, but has some elements similar, so you can talk to me about that later. But the idea is that kind of our relationship with God is a little bit like these different cycles. And it's not that we repeat the same process over and over like in an endless loop. It's more like a corkscrew, that with each rotation we get closer to him and we get a little deeper, that there's another layer that's peeled off, there's another thing that is shaped, another edge gets smoothed over, that as we kind of go through these laps, these rotations, that with each one we become more like him. And there's 5 different parts that to me stand out anyway, and I think this psalm perfectly encapsulates that process, which is why I wanted to introduce that idea to you today, is because I think in this psalm it's like that process but in song form, in a poem, in a prayer, that David here has written down that process in a beautiful poetic way. In as little as 24 verses, he somehow manages to fit in that whole process that we walk through. Now, the very first stage in that process of our character development with God, at that the first section, so to speak, I've called it awe. And I think it's reflected in verses 1 to 6 of this. It's that place where we feel so close to God, where we are just in awe of the fact that He would want to know us, that we get to have this relationship with Him. And it just feels like, that there's nothing that can separate us from Him, and we're just perfectly known and loved and accepted by Him. And it's a brilliant, brilliant place to be. It's like when we're super tight with Jesus. And the first 6 verses sort of, to me, talk about that a little. So I'm going to read them to you now. This is what it says in the NIV. "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. You hem me in, behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain." So we get this idea that He's just in awe. It's incredible that God knows him so intimately, that he can be so loved and known by God. So that's the first stage, awe. But then we see that the tone slightly changes. There's like a shift. We go from this place of awe to kind of like an awareness that although God is glorious and the relationship with him is incredible, there are things in our life that don't quite match with that glory of God. That there are things that don't make sense kind of in relation to the reality that he is in a relationship with us. Does that make sense? We kind of move from that blissful place of just, everything's great and we're so loved and known by Jesus to like, but there's some areas in our lives that don't quite look like that yet, that maybe aren't perfect, that don't make sense, that are not maybe as they should be. There's this kind of awareness that there are areas in our lives that maybe we didn't realize God was also in, that there's nowhere we can go, there's nowhere we can hide, that we are entirely exposed in his presence, and that maybe not all the things that he sees are what we would want him to see. And we can see this tone difference here when we read from verses 7 to 18. This is quite a long chunk, but it says this: "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence?" So now this same presence that we were just entirely in awe of, we're now thinking, but I can't get away from that. There is no hidden corner in my life. There's no dark place. There's no, relationship, no situation, no circumstance, no place where I can be where you are not, that you can't see, that you're outside of, that same glory, that same presence is everywhere. And we kind of starting to feel a little uncomfortable with that awareness that there's these places and these things and these kind of parts to us that don't yet really match with the awe and the wonder that we feel in the first stage. And so we carry on. "If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand. When I awake, I am still with you." So as I said, we kind of move from that place of awe to this awareness that, but this presence is everywhere, and there are these things and these kind of parts of me that don't match with that reality that, I am in this intimate relationship with God, and we're kind of getting a little uncomfortable here. So that's the awareness stage. And then we move really move gears now, then we move into the third stage, which I've called anger. And this is the part of this psalm that is probably the hardest to wrestle with, that to me anyway, felt the most uncomfortable. And when I first read it, that shift from kind of verse 18 to 19 felt super clunky. It was like going from fifth gear to second gear in a second. It's kind of that kind of really clunky, just like massive gear shift. And we're moving from kind of being subtly aware that not everything as it should be to just this anger and rage. So verses 19 to 22, this is what it says. If only you would slay the wicked, O God, away from me, you bloodthirsty men. They speak of you with evil intent, your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord, and abhor those who rise up against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. So we've moved from kind of realizing, oh, I can't get away from this presence. There are these parts of me that maybe I'm not so proud of, to, oh, but it's all somebody else's fault. I am angry, and, you know, we're now externalizing that uncomfortable awareness to either a person or a circumstance. Now, this might not happen to you. This might genuinely just be a thing that happens to me. But I do feel like often in this process that happens, where I kind of go through that cycle, and we see David going through it here too, where at first we realize, okay, you know, everything's not perfect, and then we find something to blame it on, you know, and sometimes that anger is entirely justified. Life isn't always fair. People don't always treat us kindly. There are circumstances that we feel we don't deserve. There are things that happen that do anger us. And sometimes we use them to kind of externalize that which we see is maybe stuff that we would wish God didn't see. You know what I mean? I don't know if this makes any sense to you, but I hope it does. So stage 3 is that anger, that kind of feeling of like, if only that person would change, then it would look like heaven on earth. If only this situation would resolve itself, then I would be entirely like Jesus, you know, wanted me to be. And it's only because I'm dealing with this, or I'm having to deal with that person, or I'm having to go through this or that. That's the reason why. Or sometimes we're just genuinely angry by how things are. We're like, I can't believe that somebody would do this, or that something could go this way. And we're just kind of in that just anger and angst. And I think often when we think about anger, we can perceive it as a really negative thing. And there will be times when it's not the most helpful thing for us to feel, but I don't think it's always bad. I think even that stage, that anger stage, can be helpful for our character development. It can show us some things about ourselves that we didn't realize were there. Sometimes it's when we have that moment or those experiences that we kind of realize that there's maybe something underneath. They highlight things that maybe otherwise would not have come to the surface, if you know what I mean. Sometimes anger can be a really helpful process for us to work through. So we've worked through kind of from that awe to awareness, and now we're angry. And then we can see that David moves from that place of anger and placing that uncomfortable realization on something external to a fourth stage, which I've called acknowledgement. And he says here in verses 33 and 34, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me. So now we're moving from not just being aware of that something isn't quite right and that some things don't match yet with the glory of God, to feeling angry that, you know, things aren't fair and people are not always kind and situations happen that we don't ask for, to then realizing that maybe, at least in part, there are sometimes we might be part of the problem, that there might be things in us that do not yet look like they should, that maybe sometimes it's in our character, in our responses, in our thoughts, in our actions, in our speech, whatever it looks like, that are at least partly to blame. Or maybe that our responses to the situation have highlighted some things that maybe are not as they should be. And we come to God and we go and say, I can't control what happens on around me. So God, start with me. Search me, test me, speak to me about who I am, about my character, about where those things are in me that are not quite yet how you would have me be. Show me another way. Show me how to respond to this differently. Talk to me about what it is in me that is not yet how you would choose. So we've moved from anger to acknowledgement that maybe we are partly to blame. I love it here because David says first, oh, I hate those people that are your enemies, those people that misuse your name and, aren't kind of worthy of, your glory. That's not his words, but that's kind of what he's saying, talking about God's adversaries, his enemies. And then it's almost like he has that realization of like, oh, I might be one of them. I might at times be that person too. Like, I think maybe I mess up at times and maybe I don't live up to the expectations that I have. So therefore start with me, oh God. Like, do something in me, do a work in me. And as we do that, as we allow God to speak to us and as we kind of come to him surrendering, our pride and that kind of, anger, and we come allowing God to work in us, we move to the last stage, and I've called it another way. And I love that because we can see that when David wrote this psalm, this wasn't his first lap. Like, this wasn't like the first time he went through this circle, because he knew about the last bit. He knew that at the end there is another way. This is what he says at the very end of the psalm, and lead me in the way everlasting. David knows that at the end of this process that can be at times painful, there is another way, a better way that shapes his character, the way that he thinks, the way that he speaks, the way that he acts, in a way that at the end of this rotation he looks more like God, that there is something in him that has shifted, has changed for the better. Because as we go through this circle, God frees us from things that are harmful to us, whether it's thought processes, speech patterns, behavioral patterns, and he moves us closer to him and shows us a different way, and it will look more like heaven on earth at the end than it does at the beginning. That it's more like the kingdom of God is here through going through that process as our character is shaped into the likeness of Christ. And then as we find this another way, this another response or another perspective or another way to approach the situation or another way to see what's happening or whatever it is that God is doing in our character, another kind of edge in us has been rounded or whatever it looks like, we then again are in awe of God, and we enter back into that place where we're just so privileged to be in his presence, and we go, I'm just in awe that this wondrous God who knows me so well would choose to be in this relationship with me, even though I've gone through this process again, that he would go and take the time to take me through this one more time so that I can become more like him and that I can be freed and I can find this everlasting way of life that only he can give. And then we start another lap. So I hope that you found that helpful. I hope that working through the psalm in this way has kind of given you something to think about, something to chew on. I'd absolutely love to hear what you think about it, kind of what God is saying to you about it. And if you get a chance, speak to somebody else in our community of faith, somebody who you know, and ask them where they are at, where they're kind of tracking with this cycle, and tell them where you're at, and pray for each other, support each other, encourage each other. This stuff always works better when we do it together, when we work together and we walk this thing through together and support each other in that. Find somebody that you can chat about this to and that you can kind of support mutually as you go through this process of becoming more like Jesus and having your character shaped by who he is. I would just encourage you to spend some time this week in God's presence, to speak to him and to read this psalm. Ask him about where you are at right now in that cycle. Where are you tracking with this? what parts are kind of more prominent in your life right now, and ask God what it is that He might be teaching you through that. Now, depending on your personality type, some of those parts might feel more comfortable to you than others, but wherever you are at, don't feel condemned by it. It's not bad. Not one is better than the other. I think they're all kind of necessary, they're all good, and they're all there for your development so that you can let God shape and hone your character into His likeness. They're all there for your benefit, and just ask God to speak to you about where you're at and where He's moving you next, where it is that He is wanting to take you, and how He might be teaching you through whatever it is that you are going through right now. Well, as I said, I hope it was helpful to you. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy this psalm. And I hope that this week, brings you another revelation, another kind of breakthrough in your relationship with Jesus. And I would love to hear from you, and I hope to see you soon.